always a pleasure to be here, and it's weird to talk about me, but I'm gonna. I was so fortunate to, in my early 20s, to kind of fall into a job at Atlantic Records, and Atlantic was like the creme de la creme of record companies. I mean, all of the heroes of my youth, but Aretha Franklin, who let me try on her mink coat once, and Otis Redding and the Rolling Stones, and those are other stories, but Led Zeppelin, which was my all-time favorite band, and they were on Atlantic, but they also had a record company of their own, which was Swan Song Records, and that was a subsidiary of Atlantic. So I'd been working there about 6 months when the band came into town for the first leg of their world tour. They played the fabulous Forum for 3 nights, and I got to go to 2 of those. So was this a great job or what? I mean, so it was so cool, and it was kind of a dream come true. And then they took a break from the tour, and Robert Plant, the lead vocalist, and his family went to Greece, and they were in a terrible accident, and there were multiple injuries. And Robert had a difficult time recovering. He had a leg that was fractured in a number of places, and one of his doctors had referred him to a physical therapist in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills, that was supposed to be a miracle worker. So he came, and all the other guys came too. One of the roadies said for moral support, but I think it had to do with taxes. You had to be out of the country a certain amount of time, and since the tour had been postponed, so they all came and they all had their own personal roadie, which was like a rock and roll valet, or valet, as the Brits would say. And one day, Robert called the office to talk to the head of the West Coast office, and I answered the phone. And when I heard who it was, I went, "Oh my God, how are you? Are you healing okay?" I mean, And he was so surprised, not that I'd asked how he was, but that I was actually interested in the answer. And so we chatted for a while, and then he called back the next day, and we chatted for a while, and he called back the next day, and we chatted for a while. And then I think that afternoon, the double doors opened up, and he was wheeled into the lobby, and it was like a prince on his palanquin, and he was followed by this huge entourage. I mean, all the roadies and all the band. I don't think Jimmy Page was there, but it was pretty clear that royalty had called, and the entire office was abuzz, and everybody had a great time, and they started asking. He would call and he would ask me to pick something up from the hotel or drop something off at the hotel, or arrange little things. And then one day Danny Goldberg told me, and this was all happening in a week, that Jimmy Page had requested that any dealings that the band had should go directly through me. And I was like, wait, what? And I said, I've never even spoken to Jimmy Page. And Danny said, no, Jimmy pays attention. He listens, and he watches. Now, to be fair, I didn't drink, I didn't get high, I didn't do drugs of any kind at that time. I was always available to tell you what time it was, what day it was, where we were, what was important, and how much it cost. And I was cute, so I kind of became their go-to girl. I actually, I'd find them houses if they wanted to stay, or whatever they needed. And it was pretty incredible, and especially for a young person these were my heroes. And I had a little boy who was about 3 years old at the time, so I'd get off work and I'd go home, I'd fix him dinner, I'd read him a story, I'd put him to bed, and then call the babysitter, and off I'd go mostly to the Rainbow, or sometimes I would arrange for them to see bands that they admired, like Toots and the Maytals at the Roxy, or Little Feet at the Fox Venice, or there were a lot of long, long nights at the Rainbow. And, sometimes we were downstairs, or sometimes we were upstairs in the private little alcoves that most people didn't know about. It was very cool. And I remember one time I had to leave to go bring Jimmy some cash over at the hotel, and Robert took me aside, and he actually cautioned me. He said, Jimmy has a dark side. And I was like, okay, all right, thanks. And it was really sweet. He was always kind of looking out for me. He was like a very sexy older brother, but it was it was lovely. And one time I found myself at the Rainbow in one of those little nooks upstairs with just Jimmy and me, which was very uncharacteristic. We never really had conversations. And he said to me, "So you're a single mom?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What happened?" And I realized no one had ever asked me that question before. It was like, I didn't have a stock answer. And I thought about it, not too long, but I wound up saying, well, I guess the bottom line was, I loved him more than he loved me. So I had to let him go. And Jimmy just immediately responded with, "Whoa, aren't you the martyr?" And I said, "No, not at all. It was just too painful to stay." And just at that moment, some people joined us, and that conversation ended. But I left not too long after, and I thought, whoa, who was the woman that soured him on women? And then I thought about it and who he was. Now, he had been playing in bands since he was 13, 14 years old. And he was always in the spotlight. And he wasn't, hugely famous yet, but he was on his way. And all of the girls and then women that he met were interested in warming themselves in that spotlight, the reflected light off of him. And it just, when he became the Jimmy Page, it just got worse and I think the spotlight just kept getting brighter and brighter. And it was just a really interesting eye-opener for me. But I still, I worked with them, and they were terrific, and I had been asked to arrange some studio time because they may as well put the time while Robert was recovering to good use. They were going to write their next album, which they did. And I got to be in this tiny little white rehearsal space with this incredible band while they created music. And I swear it was alchemy. Jimmy was so graceful. His hands would just dance over the strings. And John Bonham, his drumming was like a tornado. I mean, your hair would get blown back while he was playing. And John Paul Jones, Jonesy, the bass player and keyboardist, and he was so professional and so solid and lovely. He was there was a real kindness in him. And Robert's vocals, my God, they were so powerful and moving. And to watch him go from being in a wheelchair to being with a cane and then standing upright with his weight on both of his legs. And as he sang, you could just see him healing. And it was a sight to behold. I mean, they were incredible to behold. And I was really sorry when they packed up and left for Munich to record the album, although I really did need the sleep. But, and some time went by, and they came back. I saw them a number of times, but then when they came back to play in promotion of the Presence album, I went to one of the shows with a friend of mine, And I think it was in Long Beach, and afterwards we went to a party at one of their rooms. It wasn't an after party, it was just a private party. And she was in her 30s. She was a gorgeous woman, and someone that I could always take anywhere. She had been around a lot of alpha, powerful men in her lifetime. She could take care of herself. So when I couldn't find her when it was time to leave, I didn't think much of it. And I didn't hear from her for 3 days. And on the third day, she called me, and she said that she had hooked up with one of the road crew, a lovely young man from the Midlands, and they just spent 2 nights and 2 glorious days together. And then Peter Grant, who was the manager, very, very famous manager, he changed the face of music and how musicians get paid on tour. And he was very powerful and quite a presence. He was a big guy, and he was in possession of a goodly amount of cocaine, and he was very generous. He was a very generous man. So he had invited Carol and her friend up to their suite, his suite, for a party, and she and Peter Grant hit it off quite well. And as she told me over the phone, it was suddenly, somehow, she found herself naked in the bathroom, handcuffed to a pipe under the sink. And anyone who came in to use the loo, she was at their disposal, And she told me, and apparently there had been quite a bit of traffic. And she told me this with a smile in her voice. And over the years, I've thought about it, and I don't think she had a smile on her face, but, eventually Jimmy Page came in, and he just looked at her, and he went out, and a moment later he came back in with the key. And he just leaned over, and he undid the handcuffs and released her and went out, and he didn't say a word. So here was this bad boy of rock and roll who had a dark side, who clearly had an issue with women. He took one look at something that he found unacceptable without saying a word or making a fuss. He just made it better. So over the years, the decades since that, I've really tried to reconcile how kindly I was treated, how well I was treated by the bands, the roadies, and the stories that I've heard and some of the things I've witnessed. And I've never been able to reconcile that. And I don't know if I ever will be able to, because it was classic rock and roll. So thank you.